name is Safwaan, and we have with us the esteemed Sharia Supervisory Board member of Al Barakah Bank, Mufti Shafique Jakhura, who will be rendering the greater part of the presentation, and I will be closing off towards the end, inshallah. So I would like to now hand over to Mufti Saab to take us through the presentation.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wassalatu wassalamu ala ashrafil mursaleen. Sayyidina Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa ashabihi ajma'een. Amma ba'd. Fa'a'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. وَالَّذِينَ هُمْ لِلزَّكَاةِ فَاعِلُونَ آمنت بالله صدق الله مولانا العظيم وصدق رسوله النبي الكريم ونحن على ذلك لمن الشاهدين والشاكرين والحمد لله رب العالمين. Respected and honorable listeners, brothers and sisters in Islam, I want to commence today in the name of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the all merciful, the very merciful. And I want to welcome each and every one of you and commend you for participating on the Saturday afternoon in the month of Ramadan in a webinar in which we are going to discuss one of the great pillars of Islam. It is indeed commendable that we tread a path seeking knowledge, and this is something that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala actually loves, especially when we seek knowledge in respect to such a great pillar of Islam. I want to mention, before we go into the general principles, a very brief introduction on zakat itself. Zakat is actually, it is a pillar of Islam, and it is an ibadat in essence. And therefore, a lot of the rulings and guidelines with regards to zakat, the teachings with regards to zakat, they cannot be sort of measured on the yardstick of one's intelligence. A lot of people, I was on the plane coming back last week, Sunday, and one person started asking me, a good friend of mine who I met after many years, about many aspects with regards to zakat, and he says that a lot of the things don't make sense to me. Well, the asking certain questions with regards to the principles of zakat is like asking a question, why is it that there are 3 rakats of Maghrib and not 4 rakats of Maghrib? So a lot of the aspects are directly from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the teachings of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam. And because it is an ibadat, because it is an act of worship, we are to fulfill that act of worship irrespective of whether we understand the reasoning behind it or we don't understand the reasoning behind it. Why is there zakat on gold and silver, and there is principally there's no zakat on maybe diamonds or platinum, for example. We'll go into some of those aspects, but it's not possible for us to understand, to measure everything on the yardstick of our intellect or the yardstick of our intelligence, because zakat is essentially an ibadat and we have been told what to do. That's point number 1. Point number 2 I want to mention, and that is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the 18th juz of the Holy Quran, he explains the qualities of the successful believers. And one of their qualities are, and it's interesting to note that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala didn't say that they give their zakat or they discharge their zakat. He said, وَالَّذِينَ هُمْ لِلزَّكَاةِ فَاعِلُونَ. They do their zakat. In other words, just like how they do their salah, they do their zakat as well. In other words, the zakat is very meticulously calculated, it's meticulously discharged, and it is done in that particular manner. Zakat is not something that must just be calculated by estimate, and some people nowadays there's no even estimate that's there. A step further, it's by guesstimate. We're guessing what our zakat should be. We should know as ummatis of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam, as believers, what is required of us, how we go about that calculation, and then we calculate that zakat in that particular manner. وَالَّذِينَ هُمْ لِلزَّكَاةِ فَاعِلُونَ. Then if you search the Quran and the ahadith of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam, point number 3 of the brief introduction, there are very stern and severe warnings that have been issued against those who do not discharge their zakat properly and correctly. So the Quran says in one verse, وَالَّذِينَ يَكْنِزُونَ الذَّهَبَ وَالْفِضَّةَ وَلَا يُنْفِقُونَهَا فِي سَبِيلِ اللَّهِ فَبَشِّرْهُمْ بِعَذَابٍ أَلِيمٍ. Those who hoard on to their gold and their silver, and they do not discharge the rights of that. In other words, the duties and obligations of zakat are not discharged on that gold and silver. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that give them tidings of a very painful punishment. And then he goes on to explain what sort of punishment that will be. يَوْمَ يُحْمَى عَلَيْهَا جِبَاهُهُمْ وَجُنُوبُهُمْ وَظُهُورُهُمْ في نار جهنم جباههم وجنوبهم وظهورهم هذا ما كنزتم لأنفسكم فذوقوا ما كنتم تكنزون. That day when their gold and silver will be smelted and melted, and their necks and their sides and their bodies will be branded with that boiling hot melted gold and silver, and it will be said to them that this is what you used to hoard and you never used to discharge your zakat. So now taste the result and the punishment of that which you have done. So when you see these severe and many other verses and ahadith of that nature, so the question comes about that, look, why is it that if we don't discharge 2.5% of our wealth, why is it that so stern and severe warnings have been issued against those particular individuals? So if you ponder and reflect over it, the answer to that, and there might be many answers, but the simple answer to that is that everything that we actually own, everything that we have is from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Our wealth, our gold, our silver, our intellect, our capacities, everything is from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And therefore, if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala were to have told us to discharge 97.5% of that in zakat, and we were allowed to keep 2.5% for ourselves, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would not have been unjustified in making that command, in giving us that ruling and are expecting that of us. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would not have been unjustified. He would not have been oppressive. It would have been perfectly in order if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would have told us to do that. But he hasn't told us to do that. And he has told us to keep 97.5% and discharge only 2.5% in zakat. And if we are not going to do even that much, can you imagine, are we not then worthy of the worst forms of punishment? Nevertheless, we'll go straight into now some of the general principles, because time is limited, and we'll go into these general principles after this brief sort of introduction that we've gone through. Number one, we've understood that it's an ibadat, it's an act of worship. You can't sort of gauge everything by our level of the yardstick of intellect or intelligence, and therefore it is going to be based on the teachings that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam have passed on to us. When it comes to the general principles of zakat, what are the assets upon which zakat is payable? So by and large, zakat is payable on all assets or investments that are in the form of cash, gold, silver, trading stock, or receivables. In other words, wealth that is owed to us. We are expecting that money to be paid to us for trading stock that we may have sold. All of these are asset classes which are subject to the payment of zakat. We need to discharge zakat on all of these asset classes. So gold, silver, cash, trading stock. What is referred to as trading stock? We'll discuss it a little bit later on. And receivables, these are by and large those asset classes upon which we have to pay zakat. So if we have invested in shares, those shares also represent some gold, some cash, they would represent some receivables. So zakat needs to be calculated on that. Broadly speaking, these are the asset classes that we need to look at. Assets and investments that are in the form of fixed property, fixtures and fittings, equipment and machinery, these are not subject to zakat. So this is also a point to note. So if a person has a huge piece of land which he is renting out, or a property which is on rent, he does not have to pay zakat on the value of that property. Of course, the proceeds of the rental income that still remain with him on his zakat calculation date, those are going to be added to his cash assets, and zakat will have to be paid and discharged on that. Notional assets or liabilities such as deferred tax, they have no impact on zakat, and therefore they would not be included in a zakat calculation. So if it's just an accounting entry, it's not a real asset, it doesn't represent a real asset. For example, just today, this morning, a person called me and he said to me that subscriptions that we have paid in advance, they reflect in the balance sheet as an asset. But do we have to pay them as pay zakat on those assets? It's actually a subscription that we have paid for in advance. It's and therefore there's not going to be any zakat on that. So those are notional assets and liabilities that may appear in financial statements sometimes because of accounting standards, but they are not necessarily zakat addable or zakat deductible. So that is something that we need to look at as well. Thereafter, short-term or current liabilities. Which liabilities can be deducted when it comes to zakat? Essentially, just as how receivables are added or debtors are added, creditors, we should be able to deduct them. So current liabilities or short-term liabilities, those are, in principle, they are deductible from one's zakat calculation. Long-term liabilities, however, if they are very long-term liabilities greater than 12 months, ideally, the fatwa that is being given from most or many Darul Iftars or fatwa departments in our country is that more than 12 months of liabilities, what is not due in the next 12 months, those ideally should not be deducted from one's zakatable assets when one is calculating one's zakat. Those liabilities that have arisen, or those loans that have been taken in order to acquire a non-zakatable asset, those should preferably not be deducted. So let's assume I took a loan, I incurred a debt to acquire a non-zakatable asset, like a property. So I took on debt, I took on liability to acquire a non-zakatable asset. So that should not be deducted from my zakat calculation. Because if I'm going to do that, then many people who have very expensive, luxurious vehicles, and they live in palatial homes and penthouse flats, they may never ever have to pay zakat because of the nature of the finance and liability that they have assumed to acquire these non-zakatable assets that they own. And therefore, it should not be deducted from one's zakatable assets. However, where a liability was incurred to acquire a zakatable asset, then it can be deducted because a person is going to pay on the zakatable asset. Like, for example, you had a trade finance facility and you acquired trading stock using that facility. So you have incurred a liability, but you have also incurred a zakat asset. And because you are going to be paying zakat on the zakat asset, you may deduct the amount that you owe for that, and you calculate your zakat on that particular basis. When we speak about trading stock, the last bullet item that is there, you speak about trading stock, then what is trading stock? Trading stock is anything that was purchased with the sole intention of resale. Now, let me repeat that. Every sentence, every word in that sentence is very important for us to realize and understand. Anything that was purchased with the sole intention of resale, that falls under the category of stock in trade or trading stock, and zakat has to be paid on the market value, the realizable value, what you can realize for that. Zakat has to be paid on that. So anything purchased with the sole intention. So let's assume there was something that was purchased with multiple intentions. I intended that, look, I'm buying this particular flat, and my sole intention is to sell it when the price is right. So then I have to calculate zakat on the market value of that flat every year and pay zakat on that. But if I purchase the flat and I said, look, I'm going to rent it out now for the next 5 years, and after 5 years, I will also sell it. So then you haven't purchased it with the sole intention of resale. You're putting it on the market for rent for now, and you're going to be earning rental income. So then in that case, you are not going to pay zakat. And the same applies to anything, not necessarily the stock that you buy for your business. You might have purchased diamonds as an investment, not to give to your wife, for example. You purchase diamonds as an investment. An investment on diamonds, you don't rent diamonds out normally. An investment on diamonds means that you're going to be selling it later on. So then zakat has to be calculated on that basis. But if you just purchase the diamonds, look, you're getting it at a good price, you purchased it, you kept it, you're going to keep it for gifts that you're going to be giving to your children when they get married, then zakat is not payable on those diamonds because you haven't purchased it for resale. So this is a very important sort of usul and principle when it comes to trading stock. And also, what is the market value? How do you determine that? How much must I calculate, put into my zakat? Just my stock figures, which are in my when I do my stock take, at that time do I calculate it, or that's the stock figure that I should take in? Actually, zakat, it is regarded as cash. So how much cash you can realize for that, that should be the amount that we use to value our zakat, our trading stock for zakat purposes. In terms of accounts, you get different types of banking accounts. You get an Islamic current account, an Islamic investment account. Those are the ones like they are generally in Islamic financial institutions, Islamic banks. And zakat is payable on all of those. Conventional current or investment accounts, zakat is payable on the capital that is there. Whatever you have deposited, zakat is payable on that. Any interest that may have been earned, that interest has to be discharged and stripped off completely and given away in charity. So, but zakat is payable and calculatable on the capital and what solely belongs to you in terms of halal funds in those accounts. If you have an overdraft facility, we shouldn't be having overdraft facilities, but if a person does have an overdraft facility, then of course that falls into a current liability and it is deductible from one's zakatable assets. If there is credit cards that a person may have, and whatever is due on those credit cards, those are deductible. The capital outstanding is deductible on those credit cards. CFC accounts, foreign currency accounts that someone may be holding, those are fully zakatable, and offshore accounts also are fully zakatable. Of course, when you calculate zakat on foreign currency, you would use the current date, the current exchange rate. On the date that you're calculating your zakat, whatever the exchange rate is, in that also there are different exchange rates that may apply. The XE rate, the bank rate, the buying rate, the selling rate. There's so many different rates that may apply. We must use the rate which is a rate that is favorable to increase our zakat payment, actually, because there is one usul and principle when it comes to zakat, and that is an overarching principle that in zakat and in terms of calculation of zakat and distribution of zakat, you do that which is in Arabic anfa' lil fuqara, that which is most beneficial to the poor and the needy and the recipients of zakat. So we should use that rate which would be most beneficial for the poor. So if a person didn't use that rate, for example, and he used the XE rate that pops up on his screen on his cell phone, then that's also acceptable. But it would be more praiseworthy that you use a higher rate and exercise, be a little bit more conservative, and do it in that particular manner, because that will result in overpaying, but at least it doesn't result in underpaying. When it comes to shares, shares that have been purchased for capital gains, just to buy and sell, then if you unpack that, then the share has been purchased to resell, and therefore it's payable on the market value. Shares that have been bought as a long-term investment, that means a person is in it for the long haul. He's there as an investment. In that particular instance, a person would pay zakat on his or her proportionate share in the zakatable assets of that company. So let's assume, I'll give a very easy, simple example. Let's assume that a company has issued shares for 1,000 rand. The value of that company is 1,000 rands, and I hold 10%. So I have got 100% of shares in that particular company. So if I am calculating my zakat, I need to look at what is the zakatable shares in that company. So let's assume out of the 1,000 rands, 500 rands are zakatable assets. So my zakat that I need to calculate on my 100 rand worth of share will be half of that. 50% I need to calculate on 50 rands, 2.5% of that, and discharge zakat on that particular basis. Where the shareholding, sometimes it may not be easy to calculate, like where a person has invested in a fund. It's not always very easy to calculate the proportionate shareholding and zakat shareholding in all of those companies in which that particular fund has invested. In that case, the precautious thing would be to discharge zakat on the market value of those particular shares. And I'm going to skip this particular slide, these two slides, because we explained already how you would calculate zakat on the shares. You calculate your zakat on your proportionate share in the zakatable assets of that particular company. So you can calculate, just say the net zakat of a company is 27 million rands, the zakat value at least, and you look at the number of shares in issue, how many shares are owned by me, then you calculate it on that particular basis, and 2.5% of that. So that is fixed property and REITs, real estate investment trust, if a person has. Essentially, if these are fixed properties and they are not for resale, it's for earning of rental income, then zakat is not payable on the full value. But these REITs and these fixed property investments, those property companies, they may have some zakatable assets within them, like cash, like debtors, like creditors that we need to maybe deduct because of maintenance costs on properties, etc. So you still have to calculate zakat on the balance sheets of these particular companies. Exchange traded funds, which is also a modern phenomena, these also, they invest in different classes of assets, and zakat will have to be calculated on exchange traded funds as well, on the same basis that we calculate on shares. In other words, one's proportionate share in the zakatable assets of the underlying companies of those exchange traded funds or exchange traded commodities as well. Exchange traded commodities, these are only ETCs that invest directly in commodities may be invested in, provided that other Sharia requirements are also met. In other words, we must not be trading on futures, on forward markets. These are not acceptable transactions in terms of Sharia compliance, so we need to be careful in that regard as well. If they have been purchased for resale, those ETCs, then we need to pay zakat on the market value. And if they have been purchased to hold, then again on one's proportionate share in the zakatable assets of those companies, of those commodities. By and large, these commodities would probably be trading commodities, and therefore they would be regarded as trading stock, and essentially you're going to be paying zakat on the full value, market value or realizable value of those ETCs. When it comes to retirement funds, a lot of people ask at the time of Ramadan that, look, we've got retirement funds, retirement annuities. Do we have to pay zakat on them or not? So sometimes those retirement funds we are party to those funds, not because of our own volition. Actually, it is company policy, and we never ever receive those funds. It's deducted at source from our salaries. It goes directly to them. In that case, this is those funds which are of a non-volitionary capacity, in which we had no option to contribute or not to contribute. Zakat, those are not subject to zakat until the zakat payer is actually given an opportunity to redeem or withdraw and exit from those positions. But where we entered and we are part of a retirement fund because of our own volition, then of course zakat is payable on the value of that. Even in this regard, look, we need to make sure that we convert any non-Sharia compliant retirement funds to Sharia compliant retirement funds. We must be very careful in this regard, because our earnings and how we earn our funds, so maybe historically we might have invested in non-Sharia compliant funds, or the companies where we were, they didn't have an option. A lot of companies now have got those options available for us, so we must search and explore those options and try and convert our retirement funds, retirement annuities to Sharia compliant ones. And we are so fortunate in South Africa that we have those options available to us. When it comes to takaful contributions or conventional insurance contributions, what we may have a takaful policy, we may have a conventional insurance policy. Whatever is paid out in there is essentially not zakatable, unless, of course, some takaful schemes, particularly life takaful schemes, have got an investment element linked to your life takaful. So in that case, I don't think it's available in South Africa, but in other countries globally, if there's anyone from other parts of the world who are on the webinar as well, in those instances where a person has a life insurance, a life takaful, then there's an investment element attached to the life takaful, and in that case, one would have to determine what the value of that is and discharge zakat on that particular basis. When it comes to cryptocurrencies, which is also quite in, a lot of people have invested, and I'm not saying that we must or we mustn't invest in that. That's a discussion of a separate nature and for another time. But if a person has got cryptocurrencies, then he needs to discharge zakat on that. He needs to pay zakat on that. The same applies to security tokens. They are zakatable based on the net zakatable value of the underlying assets. If they are, a person has utility tokens or governance tokens, these are actually rights that a person has. And the essence is you need to look at what is the underlying asset that particular token is representing. If it is giving you a right to do something, then that right is not zakatable, and therefore this is not going to be zakatable. Sometimes you get asset-backed tokens that you invest into, sukuk that you might have invested into, non-fungible tokens. All of these would depend on the type of asset that it is that these tokens actually represent on the back end. So if those assets are zakatable, then we need to pay zakat on them. And if those assets are not zakatable assets, then we don't have to discharge them as, zakat on them. And now a new phenomena that is also there is reward programs. There are so many different reward programs that are in place. So these reward programs are also, it depends. A lot of people ask about e-bucks. Are those zakatable or they're not zakatable? My assessment would be that actually e-bucks are not zakatable, because although they allow you to buy certain things, it's not as flexible as currency is. You can only buy from certain stores in certain ways. You can't just use it as currency. You may not be able to pay your debts with it, So it doesn't have the widespread acceptability as a normal currency, and therefore zakat is not payable on e-bucks per se, on Skyward miles, on Voyager miles, on these sort of points, Hilton Honors points. Zakat is not payable on all of these things. If a person has got cashback rewards, cash is actually paid into the account, then of course, if it has not been spent and it's lying in your account, then zakat is payable on that. But if there's a cashback reward and you only due those funds, it's due to you, but it hasn't been paid out to you yet on your zakat calculation date, then you actually don't pay zakat on that, because you don't have access to those funds on that point, at that point in time. Trading stock, we discussed quite a bit about trading stock and how you calculate your zakat on it. So trading stock, finished goods, work in progress, unfinished goods, raw materials for manufacturing trading stock, and are all zakatable at the market value. Stock in transit that has been collected, but physically or constructively, so zakat should be calculated on that as well. And naturally, purchase of stock will result either in cash reserves diminishing or raising a trade payable, which can be deducted from the zakat asset. When it comes to people who are in the software industry, do they pay zakat? How do they calculate their zakat? So a software retailer will pay zakat on the market value of all software products that they are holding stock of. A software developer will pay zakat on the market value of all software products issued for resale. If software is not issued for resale, but it is available to customers subject to a lease, a license, or a service fee, then of course the zakat is not payable on the value of that, but because it's being rented out essentially. So zakat will be payable on the income that is generated and not on the actual software as trading stock. From here onwards, I will hand over to Moulana Safwaan, who will take us through zakat on typically al-Barakah transactional accounts or other Islamic financial institutions as well, how you would end up calculating your zakat on those. I hope it was beneficial. Jazakumullah ahsan al-jaza wa akhiru da'wana alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen.
Jazakumullah khairan for that very insightful presentation. And yes, as we can see, we had much to cover. We also have not covered everything entirely, but there are many new products that are available out there. And it's important for us to be aware of these zakat implications of those investments. Moving on to Al-Barakah Bank's products in particular, our transactional banking accounts are structured on a qard basis, which is a loan, whereby all funds deposited by the customer at the bank are loaned to the bank. And therefore, the entire account balance would be zakatable and should be added to your zakat calculation. As far as Al-Barakah investment accounts go, the term deposits and the sukuk investment as well, they are all Murabaha basis, which is a form of a business partnership. And in this type of arrangement, you would look at the underlying assets. What do they represent? And given the nature of Al-Barakah's Mudaraba assets, the entire balance that you would see in your investment statement on your zakat valuation or calculation date, that balance should be added to your zakat calculation, and 2.5% of that discharged in zakat accordingly. Remember that the sukuk product is a long-term product, and you may have the question that, I don't have access to these funds, so why should I pay zakat on them? Given that the zakat payer will willingly place these funds in the sukuk investment, knowing full well that this is a long-term investment, on that basis, zakat will remain payable on an annual basis on that particular investment. So 2.5% of your sukuk investment will be zakatable annually. Unit trust investments, many people may be invested in. Typically, unit trusts are invested in a variety of assets, mainly company shares. Given that it is difficult to review each company held in the fund to determine the underlying zakat value of each company, it is recommended that zakat be paid on the market value of the investment at the zakat calculation date. So this again can be picked up from your statement, which you can access through Old Mutual on your zakat calculation date, or be it any other unit trust product as well. When it comes to foreign currency, Mufti Shafique already alluded to it earlier, and here we would pay zakat on the rand value of that foreign currency on your zakat date. If you have hard currency and you are traveling and you'd like to, for example, discharge some zakat in the Holy Lands, then you can do that, calculate 2.5% of the riyals or dollars that you're holding and pay it out accordingly to a zakat recipient. That would also be permissible. But if paying in rands, you will use the translation rate or the exchange rate on the zakat calculation date. So not the rate at which you purchased, or the rate that you that is prevalent on the day you are paying, rather the rate that was applicable or is applicable on your zakat calculation date itself. When it comes to the finance transactions, now these would impact on the deductible aspects of our zakat calculation. In Murabaha finance transactions, the bank purchases the financed asset and sells it to the customer with the purchase price payable over the finance term. So Mufti Shafique alluded to the fact that long-term liability should not be deducted from the zakat calculation. So therefore, only up to 12 months of installments can be deducted. If a person has the means to not deduct this entirely and pay zakat on the assets that would account for this deductible portion, then it is better not to deduct it, because usually when it comes to equipment and motor vehicles and so forth, these are not zakatable assets. So the liability arising from their purchase would also not be zakatable. Nonetheless, if a person does not have the means to pay zakat on the little savings that they may have, then they can deduct this in order to bring their zakat calculation down. Trading stock, as we know, is a zakatable asset, and therefore you can include your Murabaha trade finance liabilities under your, or deduct it rather from your zakat calculation. It should be borne in mind that trading stock that is financed under a Murabaha trade facility is only zakatable once the bank sells the goods to you. So until that point in time, the goods belong to the bank and not to you as the customer, and therefore it will not be zakatable in the form of goods. You would obviously have the cash behind it, or you would not have raised a liability in terms of an amount payable to the bank at that point in time. So it would basically have a zero effect. Nonetheless, once the Murabaha sale is concluded, the stock must be recognized, and the amount payable to the bank can be deducted from the calculation. So the difference from the two scenarios is that once the bank sells the goods to you, then you have to pay zakat on them, on the market value of the goods, and you would not, your liability would obviously be lesser than that. So you would have a higher zakat calculation following the Murabaha second sale. Importantly, when it comes to diminishing Musharaka finance transactions, the bank and the customer are joint owners of the Musharaka property. So the outstanding capital, which is the bank share, is not a debt payable by the client, and therefore you cannot deduct that entire amount. What can be deducted in the form of a short-term liability is what is payable by the client in terms of the annual sale of units. So how the Musharaka product works is the bank sells and the customer purchases a portion of the bank share on an annual basis, and the purchase price for that is payable in 12 installments over the year that is coming. Now, depending on where in the year your zakat calculation falls as compared to your Musharaka anniversary date, you would have between 1 and 12 installments that are payable between those two dates. So in this example that we have here, a customer named Muhammad Barak has financed his residential home His Zakat date is the 1st of Ramadan, which this year corresponded with the 24th of March. His rollover date or anniversary on the Musharaka is the 31st of July. In this context, he only has 4 installments payable in this period until his next sale of units, and therefore only 40,000 rands can be deducted from the Zakat calculation and not more than that. When it comes to Ijara finance transactions, in our context, our Ijara rental amounts are paid in arrears, which means 1 month after the usage has been delivered to the client, usage of the rented asset. So 1 month's rental payment can be deducted from the Zakat calculation because it is already a liability at that point in time. Forward exchange cover is a product that is utilized by businesses to manage the volatility in the foreign exchange. These are structured as unilateral promises to purchase foreign currency on a future date, and there is no transfer of ownership that occurs at the inception of the forward exchange cover. Nonetheless, a customer would usually have reserved some funds to pay for the contract once it matures, and therefore Zakat will be payable on those funds and not on the foreign currency at the Zakat calculation date. Okay, we're coming towards the end now. When it comes to deposit amounts paid by the client, if you have an unfinalized Murabaha finance transaction, then funds paid towards these to the bank would constitute a prepayment and would not therefore be subject to Zakat. However, in the context of a property transaction, if funds are paid by yourself to a conveyancer, the conveyancer is actually your agent as a purchaser, and therefore those funds that are sitting in the conveyancer's trust account prior to the conclusion of the, or rather the transfer of the property into your name, those funds will remain zakatable until that point in time, and the zakat should be paid on them accordingly. Funds held in your investment or transactional banking account and pledged in respect of any finance facility or other transaction is subject to zakah. So we should not exclude those amounts from our zakat calculation, despite them being locked or pledged in respect of any other transaction. So that is in summary the different products that the bank offers and the zakat implications of the different products. And we now take out some time to quickly look at the questions that have come through. We've had quite a few interesting questions that we have received, and we'd like to address that for our audience today. The way it will work is we will pose these questions to Mufti Shafique, and he will address them, inshallah. If there are any other questions that you'd like to pose, please post in the Q&A chat box, and we will try to attend to as many questions as we can up till about 3 o'clock, inshallah. So the first question that we have for Mufti Shafique is, if a business has creditors and the money owing by the creditors is outstanding for over a year, is zakat payable on this amount by the business? If it is payable, is it payable as a once-off payment in a certain year or for every year that the debt remains unpaid?
Jazakallah for that question. I would assume that by creditors, we actually mean debtors. People are owing us money. So do we need to pay zakat on that or not? So essentially, zakat is payable on receivables, on debtors. People are owing us money. We need to calculate zakat on that. If there is a person who has not been paying us and we have now written off, in other words, there's no hope for us ever sort of acquiring those funds, and we've written that off, then we will no longer calculate zakat on that because we have written it off essentially. If subsequently we do receive it, then we will have to pay zakat only for 1 year and not for all the years. But if we haven't written it off and there is a hope that we are going to recover these funds, then every year we need to pay zakat on that. And that is the usul and the principle.
The next question that we have here is, I think that this question has been addressed already relating to rewards programs. The next one, how many months installments payable on property and other movable assets can we deduct when computing zakatable value? So this also we've covered.
We've covered that. I just want to cover it maybe in a little bit of more detail in respect to a Musharaka product at Al Barakah Bank, for example. So what happens at Al Barakah Bank? You have an anniversary date on your Musharaka. And in that anniversary date or on that anniversary date, you purchase a certain percentage. The bank sells and you purchase a certain percentage of that particular property, right? And so you purchase, let's assume you purchase 10% for R1 million, that million or 1.2 million rand. That 1.2 million rand is going to be payable in 100,000 rand installments every month for the rest of the year. And then next year you'll do that again. So every month you are going to be paying, you are in debt now technically for 1.2 million rands for this particular financial year. Now you can deduct whatever is outstanding until your next anniversary date. Let's assume your zakat calculation date is only 1 month away from your anniversary date. Then you can only deduct 1 month. But if your zakat calculation date is 11 months away from your anniversary date, then you can deduct 11 installments. So just a little bit of further clarity on that, because a Musharaka product it's not a debt-based product, and it's an asset-based product. So the only debt that is created is the debt outstanding after you've signed your agreement to say this is how many units I am purchasing for so much over this particular period.
The next question relates to a person's entitlement in a deceased estate prior to the winding up and distribution of that estate. When does one become liable for their share in an estate?
Jazakallah, very important and a very practical question once again. So long as the delay in the distribution of that estate is not because of you, all right? In other words, you have access to the funds, but you're just not doing it for whatever reason. So long as the delay in the distribution and your having possession is not because of yourself, there's no zakat payable on your entitlements in an estate to the deceased, in the estate of a deceased person, or what you're going to be inheriting. There's no zakat on that until you actually receive it, and from that point onwards, it's added to your other zakatable assets.
The next question, I think you've answered it in some way. It's, can you deduct your 12 months installment on a non-Sharia finance or non-Sharia bond from your zakat calculations? I assume that you would only account for the capital portion of the repayments in that case.
Yeah, ideally only the capital should be deducted. The interest is actually haram to pay. You have no option but to pay it now that you have entered into this. But my advice to everyone in the ummah out there is that since we have now, and we've had, alhamdulillah, for a long time in South Africa, Sharia compliant options available to us, we must seriously consider converting that finance to Sharia compliant finance. And I'm not sort of speaking for any particular financial institution. It can be any way, but it should be on a Sharia compliant basis.
The next question relates to zakat payable on a deceased estate in itself. So is the deceased liable for zakat whilst the funds are sitting in the estate?
No, we are only responsible for as long as we are alive. So one person, I was speaking to him this morning, and he said that his wife passed away just before Ramadan, a few months before Ramadan. Do I need to pay fidya for the fast that she's going to be missing now? No, there's no fidya for that. But the religious obligations that they left behind, those have to be fulfilled so long as they left a bequest to that effect. If they did not leave a bequest to that effect, then that is left in the hands of the heirs. If they wish to, they may discharge those religious obligations. If they do not wish to, then they cannot be obliged to do so.
A person asks, if one purchases a car to resell, but the market value or realizable value is less than what he spent on the vehicle, maybe purchase price plus repairs and so forth, what value should he use in his zakat?
In that case, you would pay zakat on the lower value, whatever is currently realizable.
There's a question here relating to what they refer to as a proxy, using a proxy figure in the calculation of zakat on shares. So some ulama of the view that 25% of the market value can be used as a proxy, and 2.5% of 25% of the market value be paid in zakat.
Yeah, no, I don't think you can. A proxy, I'm assuming that it means an approximate value of zakatable assets behind those shares. So I don't think that is the way that we should go about it. We were just doing a calculation for one particular fund, now investment fund, and actually in that particular instant, it was 80%. So if you're just going to take a blanket view, we could be grossly shooting ourselves in the foot and underpaying zakat very, very grossly. So we have to be careful in that regard. I don't think you can take an approximate, in that regard. You'd rather pay than on the market value of the share.
When calculating a zakat value for the current year, can a person deduct what the unpaid zakat they still have in their books from prior years when arriving at the zakat payable for this year?
Yes, correct. You can deduct what has not been paid for previous years and then calculate zakat. So sometimes people haven't paid. They forgot about a particular asset that they had. I had a call this week already. And he says that it just slipped my, I didn't know that I had this. And there's 10,000 rands in there, I assume, right? So how should I calculate my zakat for the last 5 years or 10 years? So I said 10,000 rand you calculate in the first year, then you 10,000 rand minus 2.5%, you calculate zakat on that, and then 10,000, whatever that amount is minus 2.5%. So in that particular way, then you calculate your zakat.
How do we value trading stock, at retail value or wholesale value?
So this is, if you are a wholesaler, you value it at wholesale value. If you are a retailer, at retail value. There is a little bit of leeway, and that is that if you were to sell all your trading stock in one transaction to one person, in one go, if you were to sell it, what would you be able to conservatively realize for that transaction? If you take that value also, that is also acceptable.
There's a question here relating to how long should funds be in one's possession. So if you've got something that you acquired or gifted, something was gifted to you days before, or weeks before your zakat calculation date, does that need to be included in your calculation?
Yes. So if you received funds, let's assume I had 10,000 rands the day before I calculate my zakat. I had that 10,000 rands for the whole year. And a day before, someone came and gifted me, a very gracious individual came and gifted me 1,000,000 rands. So now when I'm calculating my zakat, the very next day, I'll have to calculate on 1,010,000 rands. And I'll have to calculate my zakat on that basis. So it's not necessary that a year must pass by on every single rand that you have. No. So long as you are the owner of nisab, you own the nisab. Nisab is the threshold after which zakat becomes obligatory. It's about 10,000, just under maybe 8,000 or 7,000 rands thereabout. So if you are the owner of nisab, in the beginning of your zakatable year and the end of your zakatable year, even though you might have become lesser of an owner, it might have decreased below nisab, it may have gone up, you calculate on what you have at the end of your zakatable year, even though those funds would have come in a day before.
We'll take 2 more questions, inshallah, before we close. One of them being, I don't have access to pay zakat to applicable recipients, so I give it to an organization. If they do not act properly and ethically in terms of distributing that zakat timelessly, am I answerable and accountable for that?
Yes, indeed, you will be answerable, and therefore we need to make sure that we give to bona fide organizations who have a track record and they are discharging zakat according to how it should be discharged. So we need to be careful with regards to, there's no problem giving organizations. We must make sure that we are giving those organizations that are actually discharging the zakat on behalf of the donors who are giving them their zakat to discharge.
Jazakumullah khair. So the last question that we have here that we'll take for this afternoon is if a parent invests cash in the name of a child for them to access when they are older, is the parent or the child responsible for zakat?
So if the child has been given over that zakat and it belongs to the child, it doesn't belong to the parent, then of course the obligation of zakat is no more on the parent, it's on the child. But the child does not, in terms of the Hanafi school, the child is not obligated to pay zakat until he becomes of age. So until he reaches the age of maturity, adolescence, essentially, from that time onwards, the child will be responsible to discharge the zakat on those funds.
Jazakumullah khairan. For that, we'd like to really take this opportunity to thank Mufti Shafique Jakhura, Sharia board member of Al Barakah Bank, for taking out his precious and in-demand time this Saturday afternoon in the month of Ramadan to speak to us on zakat. On behalf of the executive management of Al Barakah Bank, we'd like to thank him and thank all of you who have participated this afternoon in the program. The partner of Al Barakah in this particular program, Amal, is represented by Imran Subrati, who is the Executive General of Amal, and he'd like to render a vote of thanks on Amal's behalf. So I'd like to hand the mic over to Imran to render that. Imran, you can unmute and go ahead.
Moulana Safwaan, to Mufti Jakhura and the attendees of this webinar. The Association of Muslim Accountants and Lawyers wishes to thank Al Barakah Bank for this joint webinar that's been of a very high value and very relevant to our members and certainly the businesses that have joined. Often as accountants, we find that our members are charged with this responsibility of calculating zakat for our clients. And this places a huge responsibility and especially a Shari'i responsibility on us to ensure that we correctly compute the zakatable value. This webinar has, alhamdulillah, helped us certainly better understand the more complex aspects of zakat calculations and how to deal with them. And I'm certain that this recording of this webinar will be used as a reference by our members to refer to from time to time. We are sincerely thankful to Mufti Jakhura for so ably researching the topic and presenting it, Mufti Sahib, in a very wonderful, simple, and easy to understand manner. Certainly one of my take homes from this was in your beautiful way you presented it, in that you mentioned that we should always give preference to the poor in the manner and the methodologies we use, in that the poor should be the main beneficiaries. We also want to thank Moulana Safwaan for his clarification of the zakat implications of the Al Barakah products, which many of us recommend to our clients. And finally, we want to thank all the attendees for attending. And I'm sure we all have taken a lot from this webinar. Jazakallah khair. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Jazakumullah khairan for that. Before we close, just a note to our attendees. For future reference, if you'd like to access the recording of this program, it is available on the bank's Facebook page. If you require assistance with that, you can contact our customer services and they will assist you, inshallah. With that, Jazakumullah khairan to Mufti Shafique, and wishing all our attendees and customers a blessed Ramadan. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. And remember us all in your du'as.